Namaste. Welcome back, beautiful souls. This is an ongoing conversation, perhaps personal conversation between me and my many variations of the Waite-Smith Tarot. And this side by side is the Radiant and the Universal. And I was so amazed when I did this by myself last night and looked at these cards. I am learning so much by taking time to do this and comparing these decks. I have to say that one thing I think that is important in choosing your version of the Waite-Smith Tarot is that there are certain decks that honor the original line art of Pamela Coleman Smith. And then there are others that are complete redrawings. In some cases, the preference is for something very thin and clear and crisp, which is a very different style from the way that Pamela Coleman Smith drew. From what I understand, she was inspired by ukiyo-e, Japanese woodcut art. And you don't see that in the two decks that I am comparing here today. On the left is the Universal Waite Tarot, and on the right is the Radiant Waite. And I will show you the boxes. And I did feature this deck in the previous video as well. Both decks are published by US Games. This one is colored by Mary Hanson Roberts. And please pardon the pronunciation. This deck is recolored by Virginijus Poshkus. The copyright on the Radiant White is 2003. And the original copyright on the Universal, I believe, is 1997. Right away, you can see the border style is different, slightly different perspective. One has a typed font, and the other is the Pamela Coleman Smith lettering. Both decks are certainly brilliant in color. Neither deck mentions that the artwork is redrawn by the recolorer, but in both cases, the line work is quite different. I would say the deck on the left is truer to the original art than the one on the right. To me, the faces on the right almost appear cartoon-like. This is one of the most similar cards. I would say that this card is a complete redrawing. And anywhere you see clouds, they look completely different in the deck on the right. Look at the angel's hair, for example. One thing I do appreciate in the deck on the right are the details that are showing up, such as the symbols on the skirt of the charioteer. And you'll see that in many cases, the hair is very different in the two decks. My question is that if you work with either of these decks, have you had a look at some of the decks that are more original in their artwork and compared and contrasted the changes? Because I think it's good to know what has shifted. You never know. It may affect how you interpret the card. And one of the things in the deck on the right is that the Yod He Vav He is missing on the gown just above the upward facing triangle on the tunic. The eyes of the devil in this deck are hilarious. I mean, they're pretty beady in the deck on the left as well, too, but even more so in the deck on the right. The color itself is fairly consistent with the earlier tarots, the earlier versions of the Waite-Smith Tarot. Here is another card that has been redrawn a lot. So you'll notice that the little squiggle to the right of the Roman numeral is not there. And then we have another ray that appears in the top center of the deck on the right. The face of the sun is very different in both decks. The details in the wall is different. The horse's tail and the way that the fabric of the flag or the banner is blowing. There's none of the cross, the hatch marks, the the little lines that you see in the earlier Waite-Smith Tarot. Earlier versions of the Waite-Smith Tarot, I should say. There's a youthfulness as well, too, to some of the faces in the Radiant Waite. I would say this one and Justice look incredibly young. All right, so let's have a look at the minors. If you look closely at the wand, especially in the deck on the right, you can see how it has been redrawn. It's a different shape at the top. And I've noticed in a few of the cards as well, too, that the leaves in the wands are different. However, if this is your aesthetic, then I think this is really good to look at these two decks side by side. Because if you like one, you probably like the other, and this could become your primary Waite-Smith deck. If you like the clear artwork. And in a way, this reminds me a little bit of the Robin Wood, and eventually I will compare one of these decks to the Robin Wood Tarot, which was the deck that I went to early in my tarot journey 25 years ago to work with because I wasn't particularly fond of this artwork. And yet I wanted something quite close to it. I mean, the folds in the fabric are just beautiful. If you've heard me talk about cards before, you'll know that I do love fabric. Other than the background color, I think the court cards are quite similar. And this is one where the leaves are omitted. So if you look at the wand of the queen in her right hand, you'll see that the leaves are missing on the wand, among other differences. Some significant color changes. Okay, Suit of Cups. It almost looks like these women are from different centuries, and some of the line work is missing. So these are more than recolored decks. These are most definitely redrawn. These are not just scanned original artwork and then recolored. You can see that in the cups as well, too, in the foreground. And so what makes a good facsimile? What is a facsimile and what is not a facsimile? In some way, these decks almost fall into the category of inspired by the art of Pamela Coleman Smith. though they are direct copies. However, I think it's a shortcoming of US games not to mention that these are not just recolored, but redrawn. It doesn't take an expert to notice that. And at least the deck on the right isn't using the Pamela Coleman Smith signature, because it's not. It's not her work. I did look at some of these decks with a magnifying glass yesterday, comparing, for example, the stained glass window, among other things. And really the copies are they're very good. And so I can imagine that there would be a school of thought that instead of endorsing this kind of work, would call it forgeries or something like that. Thinking that it's almost arrogant to say you can improve on the art, on someone's art. So let me know if you've thought about this, if you have an opinion one way or the other. And depending on how long you've been reading tarot and how long you've been studying cards, that of course will, that may vary. And in some cases, the Radiant Rider Waite has a depth to it. And I'm just looking at where the swords enter through the fabric. There's something done kind of well there in the textures of the red blanket and so on. So, is something lost? Or is this simply an honoring of an amazing deck and a great body of paintings? No birds. And this particular ace has a very human looking hand, which to me is kind of odd. The reason I have all of these variations is to learn more about the art of Pamela Coleman Smith, to help in my study and going into the layers of these cards. And I may see something in these decks and it will prompt me to go back through some of the ones that are closer to the earlier versions and see, ooh, is that there? Yes, that is there. Why did I never notice that? So there's something about the saturation or the brilliance of the coloring that helps you to notice things you may not notice in more in a more muted color palette. If there is any combination of the decks that I have shown you or others you know that I have in my tarot library that you would like to see side by side, please let me know. Almost thinking that I would like to do a side by side with the Radiant Waite and the Albana Waite. Thank you so much for following along. I await your comments. Enjoy the rest of your day. Namaste.